All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tim Cole, and I'm the Executive Director of Waypoint Church Partners, and we're thrilled that you're with us here for our Waypoint 55 webinar this evening. We have been doing these webinars for 8 years now and trying to provide resource and support for ministry leaders in the church. There's many ministry leaders in the church that are under-resourced, whether that's your prayer team leader or your missions team leader, first impressions and guest services, safety and security, and other of those volunteer teams, typically led in most churches, except for larger churches, by key volunteers. And so this webinar series is primarily targeting those leaders to help them feel more empowered and equipped to thrive in their position. Waypoint exists to see an ever-increasing number of thriving churches and leaders in our region. And so we feel that we're winning when you're thriving. And so hopefully these webinars that we provide every month is an opportunity for you to feel better prepared to do your ministry well. Our ministry platform sponsor since we began 8 years ago has been Mid-Atlantic Christian University. They provide the funding for us for our webinar platform, so we're thankful to them. But if you're not familiar with it, we have a YouTube channel where all of our videos have been parked since we started 8 years ago. Now 120, tonight is our 125th webinar that will be on the YouTube channel. And so we would love for you to navigate to Waypoint Church Partners and find us. And on that channel, you'll discover that we currently have over 430 monthly subscribers. And so if you have not subscribed to our channel, we would love for you to do that. That way you get the little notification in your YouTube icon that'll let you know when the next webinar has been posted to Waypoint. And so so we've got like 5 states represented tonight. That's great. We're glad that you're here. Our webinars on our YouTube channel are organized in playlists, and so they're kind of grouped. So like tonight's topic is about missions. There's a playlist just for all of our missions webinar that we typically do two per year. So there's going to be 12 or 15 of those available for that area of ministry. And so we would love for you to let the other leaders in your church know about our channel and the playlist that they can look at if they're the prayer team leader, elders and deacons, safety and security team, and other leaders in the church, to let them know that there may be webinars that they could watch and hopefully learn from to do their ministry better. Our next webinar next month, at least once a year, often twice, we'll do an outreach focused. Typically, it's about how you can do outreach to your community in the physical community. But this next month, we're going to be talking about outreach done by starting a church podcast. We've got a number of churches in the last year or two that have started church-specific podcasts, and so we're going to have a panel of leaders, three panelists who have started podcasts to share with us kind of the nuts and bolts of how that gets started and the results, and how that can be a literal outreach in the digital space in your community rather than the physical space. And so it's kind of a change of pace, and particularly if you've got an outreach committee or an outreach team, outreach person at your church that's focused on that, that they would consider joining that webinar. But tonight, we are going to be talking about having a long-term strategy, a mission strategy for your church. And we've picked up another Delaware now, so we're at 6 or 7 states tonight. So I'm really thankful that you all are joining in tonight. And so we are talking about having a long-term strategy. And so I've just got a series of questions that I'm kind of asking for you that I have heard, and trying to answer these questions for you tonight. That would be helpful as you develop what's a long-term strategy look for, and does your church missions have one? A lot of churches has a missions committee or a missions department or a missions budget, but is there a strategy of what they're doing with that budget and doing as a church moving forward over time? So that's what I want to talk about tonight, and have the luxury of seeing what a number of churches are doing, and some of the churches that we've helped to craft and engineer their own custom dedicated mission strategy that fits their church. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. So the first question I've got is, what does it mean to be strategic about your global impact? And I use the word strategic all the time, and I think it's in my temperament. I'm just wired that way to think strategically. But the word strategic is really just about having a plan. Literally, it's about making a plan. And in biblically speaking, we see that exhortation. For me, the first scripture that comes to mind about having a plan is in 1 Corinthians 14, when the Apostle Paul is instructing that church, relatively new church, about how they need to organize their worship in particular. And so the specific application of this is about worship, where he said everything needs to be done decently and in order, that you need to figure out how you're going to do worship well at your church. And so that's the specific application. But I think the general principle is true, that we would know from Scripture, is that Scripture calls us to have a plan. There's that familiar passage in the book of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, where it says, what person is going to go build a building and not first lay out a plan first? And if you don't plan for it and have a budget for it, that you're going to be ridiculed and made fun of by the community because you didn't set out first and make a plan. And so that's what we're talking about, is having a strategic plan. But the word strategic literally means to lead. It's a leadership term. It's a military term. And the Greek word that originates from really has to do with being a generalship, and so it's about, and what does generaling look like? And so what I think of it is when a general creates an overarching plan for how they're attacking the battlefield. And so it makes me always think of those pictures that we see in the movies from World War II, where they're pushing the armies around the board with their little squeegees and all that, is that you've got these generals who are leading, that they're creating this plan on how they're going to execute their impact on the map. And so that's what we're talking about when you talk about anything strategically, but particularly about a strategic plan for your global impact, is looking at the map, looking at the world globe. How is your church going to attack, making an impact around the globe? And so some of your missions meetings, if you have missions meetings on a regular basis, maybe not in the strategic mode, that it may be a missions retreat that you would have, where you talk big picture about here's our big plan, or creating or crafting a big plan. And then on your regular monthly meetings, your team is going to start executing what that plan has kind of prescribed that you now do. But what we're talking about tonight is being a general, that you sit and look at the map and figure out, we're going to go here, we're not going to go here, we're going to dedicate some resources to this area, and having a plan that's going to be played out over months and even years. And so what happens when you don't do that is that you just all of a sudden, typically the churches that we get to work with, and if your church does not have a missions retreat, number one, I would advise you to have an annual retreat to get into that big picture mode, that overarching mode where you're looking big picture at what you're doing. And if we could come alongside and help facilitate that retreat, we'd love to do that. But if you don't do that, it kind of reminds me of that neighbor in your neighborhood who gets the blow up Christmas doll one year. And that's kind of nice, whether it's Santa or Rudolph or any of the other ones that you can buy now. And so that's kind of nice. But then every year they keep adding for no particular reason, because it's on sale or it's on Marketplace. And so they add one, and then they add another one, and they add another one. And then pretty soon they become that neighbor in your neighborhood that they've got all of these blow-up dolls for Christmas, and you ask them, how did this happen? They're like, we don't know how it happened. We just kept adding every year. And of course, you never get rid of one unless it gets a hole blown in it. And so that's the non-strategic way to do missions, is that you just keep adding them because someone nice asked. And so so that's the opposite of having a strategy, is you just keep adding missions. And so the second question that I want to ask tonight is, what's the benefit of kind of choosing a strategy, number one, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, but particularly having a strategy that by design then limits the number of global partners that you have at your church, that you don't have an unlimited number of global partners. You've got some amount of budget. Hopefully your church at least tithes to mission. Not all churches do, but I would make that as a baseline goal for any church, is to tithe to missions. I think it's a lot easier to ask people to tithe to your church when you say we're tithing from what we receive to make an impact in the kingdom. And so from the tithe, you've got this amount of money, is how can you make the greatest impact with that amount of money? And so rather than, this webinar tonight, by the way, is an update from a webinar I did that would be in our playlist from like 6 or 7 years ago. And so I've got someone hit me in the chat here. Um, yes, that quantity does not mean quality. Thank you, Andrew. And actually, just the reverse, I believe, when it comes to mission. That when you make a global strategy, you've got to decide how many mission partners is it most appropriate to make the impact that we want. And I was part of a church years ago. I was the executive pastor of a church in another state before I moved to Virginia. And as a result of that, I was by default a member of every committee at the church. It was a committee-driven church, and there were a lot of committees. And I didn't go to every committee meeting, but having a missions background, my family's very missions oriented. I love to go to the missions team. So I was the new guy on staff, went to the missions committee, and I'm not sure if it was the first missions committee I went to, but it was one of the first two or three. And there was an elderly gentleman, had a briefcase packed full of missions stuff. He was an elder, and he chaired the missions team. And there were, I don't know, 7 or 8, 10 people on the mission committee that met on a Sunday night once a month to talk about all the missionaries they were supporting. And we got into a debate about whether we should continue to support one of the missionaries. And we supported, I discovered, we supported like 30 missionaries at this church, all in a varying number. It wasn't like divide the budget by 30, is they all got varying degrees of our budget. One missionary got 6% of our budget, another one got 8% of our budget, another one got 3% of our budget. And I don't know how they got to all that, not strategically, I'm sure. But then we debated for I no lie, it's probably 45 minutes about whether we should continue to support this missionary that we supported for years and years. And so eventually I kind of interrupted because we had gone back and forth about whether we should continue to support them. And I asked, well, how much are we sending this missionary? And I know who the missionary is. I won't name who it was, but he rifled through his little spreadsheet from his briefcase, and he said, well, they were kind of bottom of the list. We were supporting this missionary $10 a month. And so, which I guess is a good thing, but to me, that didn't feel very strategic that we had diluted our impact with all of these missionaries rather than saying we want to make a strategic impact for a particular reason. And I think there's more than one way that you can organize that, which we're going to talk about. But having some way to do everything decently and in order, to build a plan before you build a building, you set out and you create a plan on how you're going to do it and how you're going to pay for it. Or else you become a laughing stock, the Bible teaches. And so when you have a strategic number, you're able to have stronger funding. That's the math that's involved, obviously, is that you're going to divide the amount that you have, however much you have. Let's say your church has $1,000 a month that it can give to missions, $12,000 a year. You can be really intentional about what are we going to do with that. So you're dividing, let's say, rather than having 30 missionaries, you have, pick a number, 7 or 10. Well, you're going to divide that $1,000 by fewer numbers, and so the amount that each one is greater. You also can have stronger communication in a couple of ways. One, with all the missionaries, because you've only got 5 or 7 or 10 to communicate with, but they could communicate. But you can communicate to your church family who your missionaries are. I'm convinced that in most churches, there's not too many regular people, average Joes in your church that could name all your missionaries. Some of your core people could, people that have been around a long time. But when you've only got whatever the number is, 5 or 7 or 10 missionaries, you increase the odds that the communication and relationship between your church body at large, not just your missions team, is elevated because of the number that you have. And more important than that, I believe, is that you're able to provide stronger care to your missionaries. And we've got webinars, several of them, about getting a vision, about being a church that doesn't care about your missionaries. You begin to care for your missionaries, because most missionaries are not cared for very well. And that's something that every church can do. And if they capture a vision for that. So I invite you to check out those webinars that see what that can look like. But a long-term mission strategies allow you to, this is the final part of that list, it allows you to say no without judgment and yes without regret. That you can say to someone who is being considered to be a missionary, you're doing great stuff, but unfortunately, that doesn't fit the strategy that we've chosen at our church that we're going to be following for the next several years. And you can say, yes, we know that this person fits exactly what we're looking for. And so I happen to have a couple of photos here of some recent churches that I've attended that you can tell that they've gone down and pared down. One church that I was at recently only has 3 missionaries. Thankfully, you can tell Waypoint is one of them, and the new churches that we're starting. If you're watching the webinar tonight, you need to know that you're helping to start 2 churches this weekend, 2 house churches in Blacksburg that will start meeting corporately on Sunday morning. Their Sunday gathering, they'll meet corporately, and hopefully that'll grow to 5 house churches and 12 and 20 house churches and even more in the Blacksburg area. And so you're helping to start that church. And so we would love to be one of your missionaries if we're not. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Another church, Joe Thompson is at Smithfield Church. And I was at their church Christmas Sunday. And this was one of the walls in their lobby. And we're one of the 7 churches there, right there in the middle. Another one here over on the left is in the Charlotte area. And it looks like they've got 5 missionaries at their church. Thankfully, Waypoint is one of them as well. And so that way you can communicate to your church, these are the people that we support. This is the impact you're making. And it's not this long unknown list stowed away with that missions committee that meets in that back classroom once a month on Sunday night. But this is who our church, this is who we as a church, this is what we're doing to make an impact. And so, I've got a question there from Roger. Yeah, Roger, I'd love to tell you about that here at the end as we get back to as we have time here at the end. Thanks for asking. And so the goal here is not to minimize missions by having fewer missionaries. The goal is to have maximum impact. And so your strategy allows you to say, how are we going to make the most of what God has given us? This not only this funding, but a vision for making an impact around the globe. We're going to maximize, or at least try to be good stewards, and not to bury it in the ground and earn no interest, but to really go out there and get 2 times and even 5 times fold what God has given us to work with. And so I've talked about this before, but Waypoint is going to be hosting ICOM, not this November, but next November for the 3rd time. We hosted the International Conference on Missions in Richmond in 2015, and then again in 2021, and we're going to be hosting it in 2027. 2026 is in St. Louis. And if you've never attended the International Conference on Missions, I would love for you to consider attending that. It is the best thing going for kingdom-minded people in your church. For Great Commission people in your church. I think it's the best thing going in our family of churches, just of anything. And there'll be 5,000 to 10,000 people that attend each year at a different city, and it's about the Great Commission people doing Great Commission things. And we're going to be hosting that, but one of the features of that is there will be 50 or 60 workshops in all different kind of themes and topics to help you really have a better vision and strategy for what you're doing at your church. And I attended one of those webinars years ago, and it was called Mind the Gaps. There's actually a book that you can get on Amazon called Mind the Gaps. And I want to share what I learned about that kind of began my vision to have a vision to care for our missionaries rather than care about our missionaries. And so we've got an imaginary couple here, and our assumption for most missionary couples, whether they're couples or a family with several kids or empty nesters, whatever, is that our assumption is that they're probably pretty well cared for. And usually that comes in 3 categories of who's caring for them. In this Venn diagram, you've got their sending church that obviously they're surely caring for that missionary couple. And then there's their sending organization that they're working through, whether that would be Team Expansion or CMF or New International, or you name the organization. And then there's their family and friends network, all the people that know and love them. And so between those 3 groups and maybe some others, surely they're being very well cared for while they're serving on the field. But the reality is that most likely are going to be some gaps in that care, and that the care, and so these circles represent the care that are given by those three things. They may not be very as large as you think. For example, their sending church may not be providing very much care. What if the couple, particularly one of the two in the couple, came to faith as an adult, and they don't have a home church that they grew up in because they came to faith later, and so they may not have a ascending church or a home church that is providing relational care and pastoral care to that family, or it is their home church, but it's a very small church that runs 40 or 50 people. And although I believe a church of 40 or 50 can provide an enormous amount of care if they get a vision for it, but they're just sending checks. And maybe their family and friends network is not nearly as large as you think. What if they came to faith as an adult and their family are not believers, and they're not thrilled about their son or daughter and their family member who is overseas as a Christian when they're not a Christian family? And so that green circle might be extremely small. Or their sending organization might not be very well organized. It might be a smaller organization, or they're the only missionary or one or two from that organization. And so the breadth of resourcing and oversight and care from the sending organization is not very large. And so what you see is that there's these gaps between these, and your church can begin to have a vision that we're going to fill the gaps. We're gonna fill the gaps in the missionary care for those that we support, because the impact that you're making around the world is through your missionaries. And so the healthier they are, the more equipped that they are, the longer that they stay on the field, the more impact you're going to make. And so you can fill those gaps, and you'll discover what those gaps are. If you go take a mission trip to visit your missionary family, and you draw this little diagram on a napkin and say, hey, we want to serve whatever gaps are in your sphere of care so that you feel well cared for while you're on the field, they will tell you very quickly, oh no, this circle's smaller, this work circle's pretty good, this one is not so much. And they will very quickly describe for you what their level of care and where the gaps are, and how you can help as a church fill that in. And like I said, you can be a church of 40 or 50 and start filling those gaps, and for how they feel that they're being cared for, particularly in this modern era when we can FaceTime and Zoom and text people and have daily connection with people. When in generations gone by, it was a letter. You remember those folding letters that you had, the overseas air post letters, that took forever to get there. We're in a different world. And so you can care for a church regardless of its size. And I learned that at ICOM. And so I would love for you to go to ICOM in St. Louis, but particularly to ICOM when it comes to Richmond in 2027. There's an exhibit hall with 500 exhibitors where you get to see what God is doing all over the globe through just normal people in churches that have decided, I'm going to go do something around the world. And it's just staggering what you see there. Then there's great main sessions that are Great Commission focused, and we'd love for you to do that. But the workshops are great. And so, let's continue on to our next question here. I don't want to get too lost on any one of them, but as we dive into this, I would ask, so what are some goals and values that shape what your global strategy is going to look like? And so there's a lot of them, and this is where you get to a retreat and you put this on the whiteboard and say, so for example, when you pick your next missionary, and you may not know when that's going to be, but you can decide now what values and goals you have for when that occurs. And so then it's about the strategy that you've chosen rather than a judgment of whether this missionary couple is good enough or not, or experienced enough or not, or ready enough or not, but it's just that we've chosen this strategy and you're a good fit for it, or we've chosen the strategy and unfortunately, even though you're great people, because what missionary is not a great person? If they're going to come and share their vision, what they're doing, it's going to be hard to say, oh, they're horrible people, we're not going to support them. Everybody that comes to ask for your money is probably a pretty good person if they've decided to give their life to advance the kingdom around the globe. And so it's hard to say no until you have a strategy that allows you to say no, because this is the strategy that we've chosen. And so you can say yes with confidence, and you can say no with integrity, that this is what we've decided to do. So what are some of those goals and values that you can have? And so let's talk about some of those. Some of the goals, these are just real practical. It's not an exhaustive list. Just get the idea rolling. Is like I said, that we would like every missionary that we support to be known by most of the members of our church. That if you stop someone in the lobby and said, "Hey, who are the couples and the families that we support?" They'd go, "Oh, it's this family, this family, this family." Or you could have a goal that we're going to visit a missionary family every year or every 3 years, or whatever rhythm or frequency that you'd like to do that. And that's one of the reasons why having a global strategy is really helpful, because then you can really target, and you can get updates and newsletters from missionaries all day long, but until you go visit them on site to see what they're doing, it's a whole different world. And you can actually ask them over kitchen table, "How you guys doing?" And they tell you, "Oh, we're doing pretty good." And then you say, how you really doing?" And that second question, if you wait long enough, they will answer honestly. And another goal would be, we would like to have our missionaries visit us once every so often. And if you have 30 missionaries at your church and have one a year, it's going to be once every 30 years you might have them. But if you've got 7, you could have them in a rotation. So you pick the goals, but lay out a whiteboard and say, what would be valuable to us? Maybe not for your current missionaries, because you're going to grandfather this new vision in, but for our next missionary, if we got to start from scratch, what would be our goals for them? Some of those goals. And then some of the values is, what are we going to value as we're choosing our next missionary, and the missionaries that we have. And so one question would be, is our next missionary going to be coming from our family of churches? And for some churches, that's more of a value than others. Are they going to be supported by a sending organization that provides both ministry oversight and effective pastoral care? That circle in that Venn diagram is fairly large, so that you know that they're going to be well cared for, at least for that part of the diagram. Do you want a missionary that's going to have proven missionary experience? Or are you okay with having a missionary that this is their first assignment? Are you going to say, we're only going to, and we're going to get to this one in particular, are we only going to pick a missionary that fits the global mission strategy that we've chosen, that we're moving forward with over the next many years at our church? And so there's a lot of goals and a lot of values, but that's custom for your church and your committee to say, for us, this is what we value. All right. I didn't say this before, but if you've got questions, we've got people hitting the chat button, but if you've got questions that you'd like to interrupt me, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And so I'd love for you to hit the Q&A button and ask a question as we go along. All right, so here's the meat of what we're talking about tonight, is what are some of the options you have for the kind of global mission strategy that you could adopt? Because I don't believe there's only one. I'm going to share with you all the ones that I have seen, and I'm sure there's more. But I've got 4 or 5 that we're going to talk about here. And so the first one that I would talk about, that is kind of my go-to if someone asks, "Hey, what kind of strategy should we have?" It's the Acts 1:8 strategy. And if you're familiar with this scripture, it's in Acts chapter 1, but it's really the end of the Great Commission. It's a little bit more of the scene of what Jesus says on the mountain of ascension before he ascends back up into heaven. He says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." And then Acts chapter 1 continues on with that scene, and we forget that they're actually together. And Jesus says, "You're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth." And growing up, I always thought that was just kind of throwing about all the areas. But then when you read the book of Acts, you discover that that's really an outline for the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, what they did throughout the rest of the beginning era of the church, is that for the first 6 or 7 chapters, they're in Jerusalem. And then for the next 3 or 4 chapters, they're in Judea. And then for 1 chapter, they're in Samaria. And then from chapter 15 on is the Apostle Paul and all his missionary journeys to the ends of the earth. And I don't think it's an accident. I think it's a strategy that Jesus laid out, kind of an ever-increasing plan of the impact the church would be making. So as I think of this as concentric circles that Jesus said, you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, which would be the smallest circle. That's your city, and Judea, that's kind of your state. Samaria is your region or the next state over. And then the ends of the earth is the most obvious one. So your town, your state, your region, and then the whole earth. And so I think that's a great strategy, just because I think it lays out really easily, is that we're going to make a difference in our town. We're going to have an outreach committee maybe that is making a difference in our town with a local pregnancy crisis center, or with the food bank that lots of churches in our town cooperate with, or we're going to have one of our own, or there's a homeless ministry, the rescue mission. So that's our Jerusalem. Judea might be your state, and this would be where, if I get to run the meeting or the retreat, I'm saying this is where Waypoint fits in, is we're planting new churches all over your state and all over your region, your Judea and Samaria. And so we would love to be in the yellow or the red circles here in this strategy. And then, of course, the ends of the earth is the all the 190 countries around the globe, and the 18,000 people groups that are represented there. So the Acts 1:8 strategy, if you've got questions about that, I'd love to talk with you more about that. But I think for me, it just visually makes sense, particularly because biblically, it's what we see the first church did throughout the book of Acts. Another one that one of the first churches that I was part of a missions team on when I was a young adult, we had a continental strategy. And by continent, we decided that we're going to make an impact on each continent on the globe. Save our Antarctica. Antarctica has about 1,000 population of scientists in the snow and penguins. So we did not have a missionary in Antarctica, but we wanted to have a missionary in Australia, Oceania region, Asia, Europe, Africa, South America, and then Central America was our North American region. And so we said, and so when our next missionary, choosing our next missionary was governed by which of these continents was next in line. If we had a missionary come off the field for a particular reason from Africa, because they retired or for some other reason, for health reasons, often missionaries will come back off the field, or their kids are ready for school or ready for college. Who knows what the reason is? But if you have a missionary come off the field from Africa, if someone comes to our church and it makes an appeal to be our next missionary in South America, it's like, no, sorry, you're a great person and you've got a great ministry, but our strategy says we're going to have our next mission partner is going to be on the continent of Africa. So that's the continental strategy that I think makes sense, and I like the continuity of that as well, the simplicity of that. Someone asked a question here just a second ago. Got to figure out how to find that. I've been a part of a church as well when I was growing up. My dad was military, so I got to see a lot of different missions strategies, or lack of them. But one strategy, church that I was at in early high school, was they had a world religion strategy that they decided we're going to try and make an impact and have a missionary targeting a different world religion. So Islam, Hindu, Buddhist, and so on, the tribal religions in China, and so on. And so when you are choosing your next missionary, then it kind of prescribes for you the kind of missionary you're going to be looking for, and it allows you to say no to a great person and say yes to the right person, because you're able to say no very politely, say, man, you're great, but we're looking for somebody that's targeting a Buddhist population as our next missionary. And so I kind of like that one. When I was first in full-time ministry, the 1040 window strategy was the biggest thing going 25, 30 years ago. And for obvious reasons, the 1040 window is that area right there, the highlighted area between the 10th and 40th longitude. Is it latitude or longitude? I always get the two of those confused, but between the 10 and 40 lines right there, because about 70% of the world's population and the vast majority of the world's unreached, unchristian population is in that window. And so there were churches that decided we're only going to choose missionaries that are in the 1040 window, because that's where the greatest need is. And or our next missionary is going to be from the 1040 window. And so that was another strategy that was very popular about 25 years ago. A lot of still churches, when I talk to churches, that's still some of the language that they'll use, is that we're really focused on the 1040 window. And so one more at least. a couple more. Someone referred to this one, but related to that, I think is that another way to look at this is that we're only gonna select a missionary that is targeting an unreached people group. A UPG is what they're called, and depending on how you count them, the Joshua Project is one of the leading missionary organizations out there. If you go to Joshua Project, Google on that, a tremendous amount of resourcing from them. But they would say that there's a total of 16,000 people groups in the world, not just ethnic groups, but breaking that down into people groups, and that about 7,000 of those are unreached. And by unreached, there's differing definitions or different lengths of definition for what that means. But primarily, the threshold is typically that less than 2% of the population are evangelical Christians. And of course, you can see that 1040 window, is pretty much most of the unreached people groups on the planet. And so the two of them go hand in hand, although your focus can be described, because you could pick an unreached people group that's not in the 1040 window, but it's still an unreached group. But that is a very common language that I hear when I talk to churches about what their mission strategy is that our next missionary is going to be targeting specifically an unreached people group. Where less than 2%, like 0.5% or 1% of the population of the whole people group or the whole country, sometimes the whole countries where less than 1% of the country is evangelical Christian. And so, another way to look at this, I was part of a church years ago where I was on staff where the idea was to do an adopt a people group. And this was a fascinating idea, and our church did this, where we prayed for a couple of years that God would lead us providentially to a people group that He wanted us to reach, not a missionary. And so it was not, we're going to find a missionary and then adopt the people group that He's going to reach. But we all went as a group to ICOM, and we had prayer, fasting and prayer, and we felt providentially led to adopt a people group in Southeast Asia. And then we found a missionary that was called to reach that people group. And when that missionary came home from the States, we stuck with that people group. And when we found the people from that people group that were elsewhere around the globe, there was an immigrant center in Northern California of that people group from Southeast Asia, and we would go and do mission trips as a church to Northern California, much cheaper, quicker. The jet lag's so much better when it's only 3 hours and not 7-8 hours or worse. And so because it was the people group that we felt like we were called to reach that people group, and so that's a different. And so I'd love for you to think and even Google on how do I adopt a people group, and there's great material out there for you to look at. So then related to that, one of the newer terminologies that I've been seeing recently is the unengaged people group, what's called the unreached, unengaged people group strategy, the UUPG. So here, again, you've got this concentric circles. You got 12,000 roughly people groups, and then 7,000 of those are unreached. Those are less than 2%. But then about half of those groups, the red one, are the unengaged, unreached people. And so the definition for that, the unreached people group is where you got less than 2%, that they need outside missionaries to come and continue the work that's happening there so it will blossom. But the unengaged, unreached people groups are those groups that have basically no known church planting of any kind. Basically, it's starting from scratch. So it's like those people groups that have no scriptures yet even translated into their language, which there are many. And thankfully, AI, by the way, is one of the bright sides of AI is going to reduce the time that it takes to translate the Bible into a language that's never even had an alphabet yet, going to reduce that by a significant portion, by like 80% time. And so pray for those Bible translators out there that are trying to figure out how to use AI to get the Bible translated into every unreached, unengaged people group around the globe. But your church could say, our next missionary, we're going to go to the hardest soil, the countries that basically have no Christianity in them, and that's where we're going to go. And so that would be another global strategy that you could say you're going to have. All right, better watch our time here. I got a couple of questions. So one thing I would say as a former missionary is how do you strategically reduce the number of global partners you have? Because once you create your strategy over time, you're going to go from 30 down to whatever number you choose to have. How you're going to have make a maximum impact. And so, how do you strategically do that? And I'm going to stop share here so I can see the question. And thank you, Andrew Frost and Roger for chiming in with some resources there. But the questions we will get to here at the end. Eddie's asked a couple questions here, and Eddie, I hope to get to them at the end. So I got to get to the end here, don't I? So how do you strategically reduce? If you've got a number of churches, and I've worked with several churches to help them in a missions retreat, figure out how to do this. But I'll show you the way that I would do it, and you can understand kind of how it works. And so here, and I've made up a fictitious number of families and countries just so it doesn't get too personal for actual missionaries that you might know. But this church, for example, would have 16 missionaries. I helped a church one time that had 16 missionaries. And so you write them all down, and then you ask your mission committee, hey, I want you to go and stack rank those, maybe all of them, or your top 10, or your top 5, your top 7. It really doesn't matter, although the more the better. But you could say, for the impact that we want to have with this new strategy that's emerging, which of these missionaries are the most important to our church moving forward? And so you have everybody chime in, and it's a hard exercise. They got to take their pencil, and they've got to go, and they'll say, "Oh man, this is really hard." You go, "Okay, well, just put some nice music on and take your time." And so then this hypothetical mission committee had 7 people on it, and they had to give their top 10 out of 16 in order. So the most important one are the Jones in India for this first person, and then the Browns in Brazil are number 2, and so on. And so you put that on a spreadsheet, whether it's by hand. I've done this on the big Post-it boards, or you can get a little spreadsheet with someone on a laptop and everybody chime in. This is a long exercise because it takes a while to do this. But then you tally it up as you go across you sum it up and say, for the 7 or 8 people on our team, this is how it played out. And these numbers, I want to reiterate this very important fact, do not make your decision for you. These numbers create your conversation. The tail doesn't wag the dog. But these numbers are a picture that for our team collectively, this is kind of how we feel these, and then you can make decisions and conversations about, is this legit or not? Or why are they this low? I thought they'd be higher. Why are they this high? I thought they'd be a lot lower. But what will typically happen is that you'll see some thresholds of groupings. This happens almost every time. And so in this one, for example, you can see that out of the 16, the top 6 are above 30. And there's a pretty big gap between 24 and 32. Between the Clarks in Ghana and the Cooks in the Philippines, there's a pretty big gap. And so it creates a conversation then to say, so let's talk about those top 6. Do they all make sense? With our strategy, if it's a continental strategy or the 1040 window or whatever, how do those top 6, or do we need to go to the top 9 and start talking about those? And so these tallies, and you can use this exercise in a number of applications with strategic planning, not just missions. But in this kind of deal, it kind of helps you understand, that you can go down to the bottom ones and say, how do we start supporting these missionaries in the first place, like the Watsons in Russia? And I can tell you that there are many churches that are like, well, there's nobody currently on the committee that can remember why we even started. Or often it's somebody that's got from another church, and they become a member of your church, and they've got a friend or an in-law brother that serves. And so all of a sudden that family doesn't even attend your church anymore, but you pick that up. And so it wasn't very strategic. And it's like one more Christmas blow-up doll in the yard all of a sudden, and you got all these blow-up yards in the doll, and you don't know how they all got there. And so this list then begins the conversation about how you can reduce and just gives you a really good snapshot about the feeling that you have about how each of your current missionaries kind of land moving forward. And so I will tell you, let me see what I've got here. Well, and so I haven't put that in there, is then take your time, give all your missionaries ample notice, a year at least, maybe 2 for some of them, depending on the amount of money you're supporting them. Because a missionary that's on the field, if you tell them in November, hey, in January, the money that we're sending you, we've developed a new strategy, and unfortunately, moving forward, your mission doesn't fit in our strategy. They cannot recoup that like that in January 1st, because the next time they come home for furlough might be come home in next November before I come. And it takes them a year or two before they can recoup that. And so if you would communicate, hey, we've developed a new strategy at our church and we love what you're doing in fill in the blank. But unfortunately, moving forward, we need to let you know that our strategy is moving in a different direction and we're no longer going to be able to support your great ministry. And if you give them at least a year, and for some larger ones, 2 years, I think that is honoring the relationship that you currently have with them. All right. So here's some recommendations that I would make strategically. So that Acts 1:8 strategy is you can divide. I would recommend having multiple teams. That most churches have one missions team, and then there's somebody on the team that's kind of the Jerusalem, like our local outreach. There'll be some people that are the national. That's the church camp and the Bible colleges and whatever. And then there's the people that are, but I would make that 3 teams. This is a great opportunity to get more people involved at your church, to have more leadership involved. And so I would have a Jerusalem team, a Judea and Samaria team, and and then the international team, and have a leader of each. And it just grows the emphasis of missions and global outreach at your church by having multiple ministry teams, not just one. I'd also say you should add a discretionary fund that you can give one-time gifts without long-term commitments. If someone comes and says, hey, would you support us? You can say, man, we love what you're doing, but our strategy right now isn't going to allow us to plug you in, but we'd still love to honor what you're doing by a nice one-time gift. I was at a church one time, and there was a daughter of a member of our church who was going on the mission field for the first time. And she came and pitched, would we be, supporting her as a missionary? And unfortunately, she didn't fit our strategy, but we still said, we'd love to purchase your ticket to get there onto the field for the first time. And it was an expensive ticket, $1,500. And we were able to say, we want to honor what you're doing by paying for your ticket to get there. And so we were able to say no and still be supportive of what she was doing. And then the last thing I would recommend is begin saving for that missionary. That's the next one that will fit into your mission strategy. Because what will happen, that I've seen this multiple times, what happens, number one, when a missionary comes off the field, do you have a plan for what you're going to do next? But what happens when God raises up someone from your church to be missionaries? Most churches have already, they're house poor. They've already given away, committed all of their money. And the people that have risen up from their church, they've been, maybe even came to faith at your church, been discipled at your church, got their vision for global impact at your church, and they come to the mission committee, and the mission committee says, well, we can give you a couple $100 a month if we stretch it, because we don't have any margin to be able to support you. And so I would recommend that you start saving now for your next missionary, and have a line item. If you've got 7 missionaries, you now have 8 missionaries. It's just number 8, you don't know their name. And so when you say yes to that missionary that comes up out of your church, you can say, we've been praying for a family to go on the mission field from our church. You are it. And here's the money we've already been saving for several years. Because that church is going to be expensive when they move. And if you go to any third world country, the truck that they need to buy is going to be really, and it's a 20-year-old beat up truck, and it's expensive. And you can say, we can help buy your truck. We can help put your deposit down on your apartment for the first year, or whatever you've got this kitty that you've already had because you've strategically said, we're going to start planning ahead for who our next missionary is. All right. So here's my final encouragement, is that the most strategic question that your missions team can ask is not how many missionaries do we support and where all they are. It's what kind of missions church are we going to become over the next 20 years? That you're generaling, that you're looking at the map and you're thinking over the next few years, here's what we're going to be doing as a church. What are we becoming, and where are we headed as a church as far as our global impact goes? Well, let me stop sharing right there and get to a couple questions that I think, if you've got any more questions, chime in right now. We've got just a couple of minutes. So Eddie asked about a missions partnership. We did a missions webinar about 6 months ago about crafting a missions partnership, an agreement, a covenant between you and your missionaries, so that there's just really good expectations and communication for what your missionaries can expect out of you and what you expect out of them. And so I'd love for you to go check out that webinar. And part of that is that you've got your values that we value, that we're going to come visit you once a year. And that visit is going to be for care. That's 3 of us are going to come, small team, and we're not going to do anything. We're just going to love on you and we're going to ask you, how are you doing? And I can tell you, almost every missionary never gets that trip. That it's a care trip. It's not we're going to come and do a VBS in your town. And then they have to arrest everything they're doing for a couple of weeks to help you do your thing. Is we're going to come and we're going to hang out with you. We're going to watch your kids so you can go on a date. It's a care trip. But you can put in your agreement, this is how often we'd like you to come and come to and spend a week at our church once every 3 years. And so you can put all of those expectations both ways in that missions partnership. That's a good question, Eddie. So check out that webinar. So Eddie also asked about a missions committee. There are people, number one, that this is the only committee that they don't do anything else at church, but man, if they can come and help in a very introverted, quiet way beyond this team that's making an impact at the church, they'll love to do that. Or if they can come be caregivers to missionaries, they'll love to do that. But there's quite a bit of money that you're talking about, so you got to make sure that you've got appropriate oversight. And a lot of churches, at least the older churches that I grew up in, an elder was some way related to the missions team, missions committee. But that's a choice on how you're going to structure that. And sometimes the larger churches, even a staff person will be associated with the missions team. So there's choices there. We could talk about that if you'd like. You can. And I would, so then one last question is different kind of focuses. You can't do everything. That's part of the values section that we talk. When you have a retreat and you say, so what do we value? Do we value having one that's an orphanage and having one that's a Bible college and whatever? Or are we going to value only missions that are explicitly evangelistic in nature? So building wells are great, digging wells are great, or orphanages are great, but the evangelism is in there, but it's not explicitly driven by that. And so for some churches, they have to decide to what levels do they want that it's coming away from being explicitly evangelistically driven. And but again, that's custom for your church. And we could talk about what I'd recommend there. I'm biased towards church planting because all those other things happen when good churches get planted. All those different focuses for kids or the needy or Bible colleges, all those things happen around the globe as well as you plant good churches. Of course, I'm biased as a church planting guy, but as you're starting more and more good churches, all those things start to develop. Well, I think I've answered all the questions, and I'm really glad that you've joined us tonight for this webinar. Again, I want to encourage you to go check out some of the other webinars for missions and send the link to that to the other missions people at your church that they could watch. Let me tell you about a couple other things. Of course, we always want to thank Mid-Atlantic for being our sponsor for this. In the next year or so, you're going to hear about, as we're hosting ICOM in 2027, we've got a special evangelistic initiative called PRISM, a partnership to reproduce international student ministries, that we're going to be partnering with the College Ministries of Virginia to intentionally plant international student ministries on several campuses in and around Virginia, including Richmond, where the conference will be, Northern Virginia, where George Mason is, the largest population of international student visas, 8,000 international student visas on campus. Almost every country on the globe, including the difficult to reach countries, are represented in the student body at George Mason University. And so we're going to be soliciting churches to get behind and send money like we did the last 2 times we hosted. We invited churches to be part of it, planting churches around the globe. But this time, rather than planting churches around the globe, we're going to try and reach students that are in our backyard that are going to go back to those difficult to reach countries. So stay tuned for that. Well, as always, we want to thank you for being part of the Waypoint atmosphere and recommending our webinars to other leaders in your church. We are winning when you're thriving, and whatever area of ministry you are, and if your church is thriving, we feel like we're doing our job to help you get there. So thanks for your time tonight. We hope to see you next month as we talk about having an outreach to your community by starting a dedicated church podcast. We hope to see you then. Have a great night.
As soon as I stepped foot on MacU's campus, I learned that community was a big part of the university.
You're going to find yourself in a community of faith. You're going to find yourself in a community that loves you and accepts you.
It's a great opportunity to grow as a person.
I feel like MacU is equipping me to be able to defend my faith and help others no matter where I'm put in life.
My faith and religion is much stronger since being here.
We here have a purpose of trying to help you to become the person God's called you to be, to make a difference in the world as a leader. And while there's plenty of places that offer wonderful opportunities, having that focus, I really do think makes a difference.
The professors here, the students, we all want to see each other grow, and you're going to be loved, you're going to be welcomed, and they're always going to care for you.
The professors want to get to know you. You're not just a number.
Come take a tour, see what campus life is all about. I truly think that everyone who comes here is here for a reason.
There's so many opportunities for you. There's something for everybody.
You become part of something bigger than yourself when you come to Mid-Atlantic.
You see these students come in, some of which are very unsure of even why they're here, and they leave prepared to go do something great for the world.